Welcome everyone to the second BPR reading of the year. I'm hoping to have these quarterly, but I'll announce when we find out who's going to read next. We'll send you all emails. I'm so excited to have Taylor and Jenny and Ananda and Mary reading this evening. Ananda, Jenny, and Mary have been contributors to BPR, and they've been friends for a long time. And Taylor is a UAB product. She came through our undergraduate and graduate program, and I had the great honor of being her thesis director on both her honors thesis and her graduate thesis. And she's probably super tired of me, and she's probably twitching right now after seeing me. But it's great to have her in here. She's at the University of Cincinnati, finishing up or in the middle of her PhD. I was going to say a few things about BPR for those of you who don't know. BPR was founded in 1987 by Robert Collins and Randy Blythe. I came onto the journal in the early 1990s when I was a 27-year-old graduate student who was trying to find his way. They took me in, and that really secured my love for poetry. So I'm indebted to both of them. Started out on staff, then moved to an assistant editor, then a co-editor. And then I went off and did another useless degree at another graduate school and came back and then took over as editor-in-chief eight issues ago. The current issue of BPR, which we'll provide a link for, has David Kirby as the featured poet, and I think it clocks in at about 260 pages. We have back matter reviews, an interview, a critical essay, and just gobs and gobs of wonderful poetry. But I would love for everybody in here, if you're a poet, to send me some work. We're open for submissions right now, and I'm sorry, I'm a cave person, but I only accept snail mail, but we will get it back to you, your SASE, quickly. And if you don't know the excitement of receiving something in the mail that isn't junk mail, just wait till you receive your SASE, and I put a Slim Jim in it, or maybe a peppermint. All right, I'm gonna introduce some of the folks who helped me out at BPR, and I've started some cool things with BPR on social media and have really helped to secure this reading series. Emily Howell, will you wave to everybody? Emily is an intern. She's a senior at UAB. She's been in a couple of workshops with me, and she's just been fantastic. She also is in charge of Facebook, UAB, or BPR on Facebook. Kaylee Rastigar, she is my other intern, and she is a creative writing concentrator, and she has been taking care of Instagram. And they both set up this reading and have been corresponding with the readers. Meredith Beretta, she is on staff with me, and she has been helping out with proofing and talking with editors for this future issue. Haley Cotton, of course, she is my managing editor. She does all the production for BPR. She does all the needlework and the tweezer work, and she puts up with me, and she throws things at me when I need things thrown at me, and kicks me out of the building when I need to be kicked out of the building, and throws me a sandwich when I forget to eat. So yeah, she takes care of the child who is me. And there's Mary. Mary is our fourth reader. Great to see you, Mary. I'm glad you can make it.
I couldn't get all my electronics in gear, but I'm so glad to be here.
Good. I was extending the introductions just to hope that you could come in. Now let's take the attention off of me. And Meredith, do you want to introduce our first reader, Ananda?
I will be glad to do so. Hello, everybody. Ananda Lima's poetry collection, Motherlands from Blackthorns Press, is the winner of the Hudson Prize. She's also the author of 2 poetry chapbooks, Amblyopia, Bull City Press, and translation, Paper Nautilus, a fiction chapbook. Tropicalia, Newfounds, and a poetry and photography chapbook, Vigil. Get Fresh Books. Her work has appeared in the American Poetry Review, Poets.org, Kenyon Review Online, the Birmingham Poetry Review, Gulf Coast, and elsewhere. She has an MA in linguistics from UCLA and an MFA in creative writing and fiction. And without further ado, I am honored to introduce Ananda Lima.
Thank you so much. Thank you for the introduction. Thank you for having me here. BPR is so amazing. And thank you for having my poems there. The issues are so beautiful and so good, you know, so it's really lovely. And I'm just so happy to be reading with my co-readers who are amazing. So this is great. I'm going to read the poems that are in BPR. Which are also in my collection. So I will start with one that is about photography. And nobody would tell you if they read my book that it's about photography, but it sort of gets in there in all my work. So this one is called Photograph of Water as a Mass Noun. And I wrote it after sort of like an afternoon, like sitting by a waterfall kind of situation. Photograph of water as a mass noun. Learning to expose a photograph leads to waterfalls. The effect of the shutter speed easily detectable. Slow it down for the camera's translation of motion into static, liquid to silk to vapor. Dragging the shutter gives the water about to reach the rock and the water on top of it and the water just plunged over time to come together into a single frame. Outside the photograph, water keeps coming down, dark floating on top of more of itself, white foam as it splashes, gelatinous and transparent on top of flat rock, slithering down past carved by its antecedents, roaring as it beats against boulders. And it falls, and it keeps falling when I place a cap over my lens, walk down the mountain, put a kettle to boil, and drink as I look at the photographs on my screen, and it keeps falling as I fall asleep. All right. Good. So the second poem, it's a little bit more visibly linked to the themes of the collection. And I wrote it, it's in this form called American Sentence, which is basically just an Americanized haiku, which that naming is already interesting to me. And it's the form was invented by Allen Ginsberg, and the poem is also after this poem by Ashbery that is 37 haiku, but mine is just 7. All right, and I guess each American sentence can also be its own poem. 7 American sentences. In the beginning were people who lived here before. In the beginning of spring, spirits hovering over the waters. The vault, evening, morning, sky, the second day after a shooting. Body, let it serve as a sign to mark times and days and years. Correction, George Washington's teeth were never made of wood. In the beginning of the end, missing signal for lane change. And on the 7th day, same thing again, only some rested. All right. And that poem I wrote around an anniversary of Sandra Bland's death. All right, so this one is also not very cheery, but this other poem I wrote after there was a seed bank with sort of collecting all the known seeds uh, in the world for the future, and it was breached by melting ice. I don't know if anybody remembers this. Apparently it got fixed for now, but I wrote it around then, and it also makes reference to this movie. I don't know if you know it, called Ice Age. It's like a cartoon. It's very freaky. It freaks me out a lot. So it's after that, and after watching my son watch that movie, and it's called In-Flight Entertainment While the Doomsday Seed Bank is Breached. My son's face is blue, with the soft light of ice age falling on his round cheeks, the voices in the animation contained by the cups of his child-sized earphones, muffled by the shush of turbans, so constant, so similar to the soothing sound of waves, we forget the aggression of their volume. On his screen, the body of a desperate little mammal is repeatedly crushed by gravity. Rocks and metal, the creature still, unable to reach the nut as its head smashed between two stainless steel plates, its eyes bulging out of their sockets, and my son laughs. He understands what is expected of him now. In this type of movie, there are always good guys who always win. When we walked in the dim amber light in the Natural History Museum, surrounded by bones, we were told we were the sole survivors, the lonely branch of the human family tree, because of our superb adaptability. And we chose to differentiate ourselves from the dead with a postfix, sapiens. The picture of the global seed vault in the Arctic made me think of architecture and the architect who said, "A vida é sopro," life is a breath. At that speed, the floor of the poet's green room is damp, now wet, now water covers the wrought iron feet of the bed where she sleeps with her lover. And water fills the Natural History Museum, and we float above the tallest of bone structures. Our heads tilt against the ceiling as we drink from the mouth of a whale, the last sliver of air. And I hum and hold my son's hand and think of the cow carcasses in the drought-cracked soil of the Northeast. The walls in China, Germany, Palestine, the barbed wire walls around my mother's condominium, and the futile future walls sprout one after another in an accelerating stop motion video, then blur, then crumble. And soon there'll be no need for green camouflage uniforms. Gone will be the beautiful armament celebrated in the old news. Gone is music. Gone is the green of money and the green of poetry. Gone were the paintings and recordings in museums. Mathematics gone. Long gone have been architecture and those seeds in the abandoned coal mine in the Arctic. On the colorless surface of the moon, imprinted in its sterile dust, undisturbed by wind or water, there will always remain a footprint. But for now, I turn my screen to a map of our journey, our airplane tiny, surrounded by blue. So I have one more poem. So these were the ones that were in BPR. Thank you so much, everybody, for having them. And then I have one more. I wasn't sure what to read, but then when I saw that we can share screens, I decided I'm gonna read this one. Okay, I'm gonna share my desktop. So can people see my desk? It's very messy, sorry. All right. I hope there's nothing crazy there. All right. So this is an ekphrastic poem. I know Adam has lots of beautiful ekphrastic poems, so I thought this would be a good one. So I wrote after this photograph. So the photographer that I work with, Byas Eyes, he told me to choose, and I just sort of kept coming back to this one, and I just really love it. And I thought about it for a long time, and after thinking about it, I love the pandemic stuff going on in this delivery. I realized it really reminds me of this as well as everything else. So I thought it was a touch. It was just very cool. So here is the poem, and it's called Delivery. Delivery. On the photograph, I see what I was not seeking. God in the outstretched arm, the reach, the almost touch. I can almost remember how it was, almost all of us together in hunger for each other. Parto is the noun for delivery in Portuguese, as in child, not pastrami sandwich. At the center of the frame, almost turning the corner, I see her hungry, like God hungers for giving his languid creation breath. In her cloud, halo, drapery of stickers, she stretching, he masked in her likeness. Parto is also a verb, to leave in the first person or to divide. God knows what it's like to be lonely too. Thank you so much. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Ananda, for sharing your poems. I think I can speak on behalf of everyone saying that we all really enjoyed that. So our next poet is Mary Moore. Mary Moore's poetry books include Dear If, Flicker, and The Book of Snow. Chapbooks, both prize winners, are Amanda and the Mansoul and Eating the Light. Recent poems also appear in Poetry, Prairie Schooner, Birmingham Poetry Review, Gettysburg Review, Nell, Terrain, Georgia Review, 32 Poems, The Nasty Woman Poet Anthology, and much more. A retired professor, she lives in Huntington, West Virginia. Now I'm going to hand it off to you, Mary.
Unmuting myself. Should I just begin? I'll be reading several poems for Dear If, from Dear If, and one newer one. Ultramarine bulges through my west window. Over the backlit horizons burn. A Maxwell Parrish blue page from nature's book, where some saints have read their God. The walnut trees, black-green fronds arc loosely and brocade the blue, which presses up around the leaves, arrayed like comb tines or teeth. Nightfall flattens it all, a breast X-rays image, calcium starred. Or is that look cataracts postcard? Farewell, poor vision. The Mediterranean sends you color. Dear neon, ink without letters, tails, serifs. Dear toothy fronds, grins without mouths or heads. Oh, look, read almost reverses dear, dear gaudy blue, dear if and rift, dear void. Carol of Seeing Things from the Porch is in Birmingham Poetry Review. And Dear If, which by the way is forthcoming, it's not already here, from Orison, probably in April of 22. Carol of Seeing Things from the Porch. They use needles, that mishmash of pound signs and hash marks, tagging who knows who, have snagged a small web. Hammock, the eye can ride, cloud, snit, snow, thistle. The no-see-ums dot the web and the air around me. Little eaters who nip my bud, whatever that might be, a wing, a tooth, a brood of worries. No, oh, small blooded ones, we're kin. I can't quit or requite you, who even mob the red and black salt box left out since last year's snow. Abandoned, it bulges. A rock of salt, a block of salt on meat and put away. It memorializes our lackadaisical forget and don't look, like Lot's wife, who's looking at the ruined, forbidden city, astonished her into salt. Why salt? I bet she wept. Her whole damned body became tears in different residue. The weird logic of metamorphosis by God. Medusa's beauty earns her a coif of snakes. Here and now, chorus of keening, a siren, and a black and white hound actually called Carol. The two ululations braid and rise so high they hurt to hear. Is it consoling that earth metamorphoses minerals, charges, urges, maybe soul, and salts it away into place? The U tags us all, or will. You're it. The mystery that luck or providence has wrought is that wary and aware even are when witness turns to tears, salt, stone. Also from Dear If, maker and mocker. It's neither here nor there, Eve would say, or evening, whatever they call her. She ignores the protocols. She'd rather read the stars and name them those beautiful campfires he cantored into being. She chants the constellations, wild horse, its mane a wind, dust devils whirl, tornadoes muscled torso. Maybe she named the animals after Adam did. Is, isn't, might be, can't. Big God says she's just a mouth, a lure, who'll play and ply and lithe you, dance your one hold pipe. She snickers, eats an orange, and finger taps a beat he's never heard. The old table musical enough to bear both tune and player, just like her, four-legged too, if you count arms among her charms. She makes and bears her likenesses and his. She's Lady God. Her odd reward is labor. I get it. She's odd, irked, outgodded you, her mimicry mocks. Dear God of British slang. Chuff might name a bird, but means quite pleased. Those British words so well. But do we ever chuff you? If you are a you, does the chuff? He's peacock eye blue, his neck ruffed green, black eyes ringed ice pink. He says only chuff, chuff. Don't think you can capture and ankle cuff him, tabulate his habits. He eats air and bugs, likes the lacewing best. Your names do nag me like British titles, Earl or Baron or Lord. The chuff lords it over no one, though he shows off. He's pleased to be bobbing as he walks, his beak long and thin, borrowed from the woodcock and slightly arced at the angle of longing to chuff you. A friend just told me tigers say chuff. We don't know if it warns or says they're pleased. I've heard that tigers purr, striped light and dark, like moods, even zood. No curiosity would tug me close enough to know purr and roar from chuff. Even mute, the tiger speaks the speech, caught, breath, heart, skip. He wows me, lords me, wordless. Do I have time for one more? I'm thinking I'm okay, but thanks. Not understanding but bearing. This is also in Dear If and was in the Inflectionist Review. Not understanding but bearing for Clodagh Smith, one of my oldest friends. One approach is to practice becoming the thing you aren't. That graveyard column that looks like marble but isn't, which bears only air, a singular ruin and a rule of one. Or take for contrast the weightless lei or wreath of Tibetan prayer flags my window holds, paper miniatures, red, green, blue, gold, square wings strung together, each bearing words, petitions. They shush and whisper when I pass. The language of quiescence, diaspora's small vespers, and they wait like a watcher's breathing, silence listens to. Sometimes the temporal bulges, an imminence, and a pressing forward around a ruins column, among flags that tremble and pray. And there's breakage. The bare tree limbs on the ridge have fractured sunset, burning wedges, wing-shaped shards. Even breathing breaks the sky. My friend who's dying still breathes, is stirring the prayer flags. The paper lisps, a slight sibilance, breath and no breath, breath and no breath. If what makes her her survives, it is not the eye, thick, fluted with rain, sun, and the traffic of eyes. It can ride the air, able to bear and break without breaking, burn without burning, even in this room where I hold vigil among flags whose country is air, our country. And what is the I, after all? Air, a vowel I pronounce I, almost a keening. Thank you.
Mary, thank you so much for sharing with us. I know we all enjoyed it. Next up, we have Taylor Byas, who is a Black Chicago native currently living in Cincinnati, Ohio. She was the first place winner of both the 2020 Poetry Superhighway and the 2020 Frontier Poetry Award for New Poets contests, and the finalist for the 2020 Frontier Open Prize. She's the author of the chapbook Bloodworm from Variant Lit, and her debut full-length I Done Clicked My Heels 3 Times is forthcoming from Soft Skull Press in spring of 2023. She's represented by Rena Rossner of the Deborah Harris Agency. All right, and I'll hand it over to you, Taylor.
Thank you so much, Emily. And thank you especially to Adam for having me. and to my co-readers and to all the familiar faces from UAB that I see in this crowd tonight. Hi, Jennifer, Shelly, I see Chris is here. It feels really special to be reading some poems from Bloodworm, especially because so many of these poems are actually poems that were from my master's thesis that I wrote at UAB. So it feels really special to be sort of in the room with this book tonight. I'm going to start with 2 poems from Bloodworm, and then I'm going to read 2 or 3 that aren't in the book. And I'll start from my favorite poem, and it's a pantoum, and it's called "I Don't Care If Mary Jane Gets Saved or Not." I can't lie. I tried to imagine myself in Spider-Man's grip, my damsel in distress scream strung through the city like Christmas lights. I really did. But my black ass would never be in Spider-Man's grip. My damsel in distress don't look like Kirsten Dunst or Emma Stone. I looked, I really did. But my black ass would never be dainty enough to be rescued by a white hero. The movie villains don't look like Kirsten Dunst or Emma Stone. I looked. But the women who terrorize me in real life are dainty enough to be rescued by a white hero. The movie villains always come for the white heroine and she will cry. But the women who terrorize me in real life are strategic, hammering out an axe with tears. The playbook goes, always come for the white heroine and she will cry wolf, cry danger, call the police, the 911 call strategic, hammering out an axe with tears. The playbook goes, there's an African-American woman threatening me, cry wolf, cry danger, call the police, the 911 call a masterclass on acting. Mary Jane would kill me if it was in the script. There is an African-American woman threatening me. Cry until Spider-Man dropped from the sky. The way I play dead, a masterclass on acting. Mary Jane would kill me if it was in the script, because what else could I be but the villain until Spider-Man dropped from the sky? The way I play dead in the cocoon of Spider-Man's web, you can tell I've practiced. Because what else could I be but the villain? I can't lie. I try to imagine myself. Okay, and then I'm going to read another favorite from this book. It's about my experience going to the Titanic Museum in Orlando, Florida, which is just like a really weird experience. Also just thinking about the Titanic, also just thinking about the history of the Titanic and thinking of myself as a Black person and the lack of Black people, especially thinking about the movie. So this is the Titanic Museum in Orlando, Florida. I board 1912. A fake boarding pass renames me like a new document, brands a fresh time of death. No cameras to recall what I cannot. The necktie and sock starched by ocean, a pocket watch, a gilded macaroon balded of gold flecks, its hands pegged on salt annulled hours. I don't look for myself in the list of dead. The names like Star Wars opening crawl graved in thin ice, the letters thin scars. But a plaque wards off my touch. An iceberg sweats in another room, and I press my palm into its face until it aches. The surface ticketed with handprints and finger holes from the guests that passed before me. But this is the easy part. On the fake deck, I forget myself. Lights pitched over the railing to parrot water without breath. Waveless. One of the doors portholes black as a moonless night. And catch the hollow of my own mouth, the surprise at this sudden rewrite of history. the reflection of my Black face, a stranger to this ship. Okay, I'm going to read some new poems that I've written. This first one is a sonnet that I wrote recently. I love form, I'm obsessed with form. And so this is thinking about just the difficulties of being in a pandemic. So this is Sonnet for Longing, Being Mistaken for Sadness. Honey, the sun's no longer centrifugal. For weeks, its yellow failed to pull me out of unliving. The hip dug dip my usual position leaves in bed. I lay here, fully naked, unsexed, the only remnants of life, the Tetris of takeout boxes castling around the nightstand, noodles dried and circling a knife like legs, and again, the honey-thickened sound of lonely. Even the doctor is bodiless, a pixelated ghost who can't prescribe me what I need, a hand to pull me out of this by my thighs, and oh, an epiphany. I transcribe alone as unloved. I touch myself, then don't. I will a man to call, knowing that he won't. And this poem is called After the Car Accident. I slow traffic with my worry, kneeling and checking my car for damage, my palm on its feverish hood, like a mother checking a child's temperature, in the heat of the sun doubling its sickness. In the black paint's warped reflection, I could be mistaken for my father, this froggish position, squatting on my toes, my forehead becoming his in its rumpled state, even our concern biological, shared, right down to the way we squint at an injured thing, the way we only have temporary fixes for what is broken. I list the damages out loud, to no one, to the metronome of my hazard lights, to convince myself I've done it. This too is hereditary, struggling with admissions of guilt. On the phone with the insurance company, I begin to unbraid a legacy of blamelessness. Yes, I was operating my vehicle alone. The car was parked and empty when I hit it. This is just another version of the tree falling in the forest question. If no one saw me hit the car, did I do it? If my father never apologized on our old phone calls, did he truly wound me? The insurance agent on the phone is asking questions, following the printed script taped next to her computer screen. Is the car drivable? Are you hurt? I don't know which question I'm answering anymore. It doesn't matter. Yes, it comes pouring out of me like smoke from a car's underbelly, the hiss of air finding the path of least resistance. Yes, yes, yes. Okay, this will be my last poem, inspired by the little creepy painting behind Jenny. I thought I would read a little creepy poem for October. And so this is a poem titled On Hesitation, about driving and encountering things like creepy barns along the way at night. On hesitation. I wished I'd let you drive as the sky closed the lid on things. The headlights on the other side of the highway blurred to orbs as fuzzy as dandelions, my sight failing in the dark. But I was in a groove, wasn't ready to stop again before we crossed the next state line. So when you spotted a barn, a black stamp licked and pressed against the midnight blue, I stopped you before you even began. We don't have time for adventures. But this pattern continued, you straightening at each siding of wood rot, at every front barn door cracked open like a knife wound. Soon, I tired of the cornfields, their sameness, the vanity with which they continued to spawn the self. So I indulged you, abandoned the highways smooth to spit gravel in the wake of your Jeep. When we pulled up to this barn, you dated its abandonment. At least 10, 15 years, because of the smile of the roof. The wind breezing through the barn's gut, its catcall whistle, and both sets of doors blown open. Your pulse two-stepped during our silent watching, and I thought you were turned on by this somehow, and my God, you were. Let's go in, find some hay like in the movies. And what of the pessimist in me? Betting on the rustic charm of disarray as a trap, some chainsaw-wielding killer eyeing us from the Cyclops window. Even you could go rogue, one bite of me giving way to another, then another. But you've gotten out of the car now, come around and opened my door. We'll laugh about this years from now. Your hand in the dark, not how I've always remembered it. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Taylor. That was beautiful and emotional. I had to pull some tears back. I really enjoyed that. Thank you. Thank you so much. Finally, I am absolutely honored to introduce Jenny Molberg. Jenny Molberg is the author of the collections of Marvels of the Invisible, winner of the Berkshire Press, and was published in Tupelo Press 2017, Refusal from the LSU Press in 2020, and the forthcoming from the LSU Press in 2023, The Court of No Record. She has received support from the National Endowment for the Arts, the Swanee Writers Conference, Vermont Studio Center, and the Longleaf Writers Conference. Her work has recently appeared or is forthcoming in Plowshares, West Branch, the Missouri Review, the Rumpus, the Adroit Journal, Oprah Quarterly, and other publications. She is Associate Professor of Creative Writing at the University of Central Missouri, where she directs Pleiades Press and co-edits Pleiades Magazine. You can also find her online at jennymolberg.com or at Twitter at jennymolberg. And with anticipation, very excited anticipation, I am thrilled to listen to Jenny Molberg. Thank you.
Meredith, thank you so much. And thank you to Adam and Haley and Emily and Kaylee for your hard work putting this amazing event together and on the beautiful Birmingham Poetry Review. I know how much work that goes into that, so thank you for that. And Taylor, Ananda, and Mary, you're just absolutely stunning, and I'm in awe of you, and it's a pleasure to read with you. So I'm going to read a few poems from my new collection, The Court of No Record, which comes out in early 2023 from LSU Press. And a couple of these poems are in the new issue of BPR. This book contains a sort of like hybrid section of poems that fictionalize a court transcript that's based on personal experience. So I had to face my abuser in court, partly because I had written about his abuse. So these poems are thinking about the ways in which the court system in this country fails victims of abuse and victims of many kinds, and the process and potential ramifications we might face when we speak out against our abusers. I want to say too that I believe we can fight together to make positive changes with this issue, and I think we're already seeing some changes happening. Proceedings. The honorable answer offers me the option to reset my court date due to his personal relationship with my abuser's mother. I have driven halfway across middle America through rhinestone-studded stampedes in the great dripping caves of the Bible Belt to Broken Mirror County. Broken Mirror, where I was once thrown in a room with a pit bull. The dog slept with his sweet paw around me and breathed his panicky breath into my neck. To say me is a stretch. The self was a rock blown into many rocks, sparkling and hot. The alpha made of me a souvenir. He put me in a box he occasionally opened, then vanished me in the palm of his hand. Whereupon the following proceedings are heard in the court of no record. To say heard is a stretch. To say stretch is a lie. My pleated pants were drenched in sweat as my abuser's lawyer in her wrinkled skirt and ruffled sweater heckles me into a corner. To say corner is generous, because in the court of no record, where the abuser is petitioner and the victim respondent, the walls are made of ideas, so the men can walk straight through them. This next poem is in BPR, so thanks to the editors. My testimony. My name is called. I walk to the witness stand. The eyes in the courtroom on my back. Even my hair feels stupid. I am back in the prison of the alpha. He laughs at me. I try not to feel it on my face like a virus come in through the blood. You're well aware of why you're here. I want to shout, to run, to set the building on fire. But in the court of no record, you cannot react. I sit with my hands in my lap. Tell us about your tumultuous relationship. Tell us of your arguments. Many things I cannot speak. We didn't argue, I said. He abused me verbally and emotionally for hours on end. I didn't know if I existed either, but you aren't here as the victim, his lawyer says. I say nothing. Exactly, the judge says. I don't need to know whether these things happened to her, the judge says, only if she wrote about them. I sweat. I look at my friend. I look at my friend who says with her mind, you know who you are. You know who you are. Do you understand this would be humiliating to him? The attorney asks. Do you stand by what you said of him? The honorable answer asks. I'm sorry, Your Honor, I say. Let me explain, Your Honor. It's a yes or no question, he says. Yes, I say. I do. I do. The honorable answer speaks. So this one is told in the voice of the judge. I know you are very zealous. I appreciate that. Please let me rule. Pardon me while I unveil my friendship with the abuser's mother. Pardon me while I cite my expertise on domestic abuse. Pardon me while I eat this bag of Cheez-Its, for I have missed my lunch. Pardon me while I do not hear. Pardon my confusion about the internet. Pardon me, but some abusers can be very sad. Pardon me, but a person can feel harassed. Pardon me, but why don't these women stand up for themselves? Pardon me, but a victim of abuse must bear the weight of paperwork. Pardon me, but have you tried the police? There is help for you if you prove your case, if you go through the proper channels, if you humiliate yourself. You place your body in harm. You stand before the court in proper attire. You endure the long hours. You return home under the law, protected by a signature, and the threat of police, who may or may not respond, who may or may not respond violently, who may or may not come. Okay, so this next poem is also in the new issue of BPR. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the poem, I'm sure many of you are, that I'm engaging with here, which is The Dover Bitch by Anthony Hecht. And that poem speaks back to Dover Beach by Matthew Arnold. So there are some lines in this poem lifted from the Hecht poem, and you can probably tell I'm not really a fan of either poem. So I thought I'd join in on the conversation. Against the Dover Bitch, after Anthony Hecht. Once I read a fairly good translation of Hesiod, and this girl who was me slithered along the spine, deferential to the men who keep the poetry. As my daddy said, I've cussed between the lines. You mustn't judge me for that. I've many heads. I speak to suit the rooms they move in. Xenic breath, and each a brain running to fat. Though I respect a man's regarded work, Shakespearean allusions, American remembrances of a horrible war, when you show me a good time, you only make me smarter. I do recall that day on shore, your basket of beer and French perfume, how you pinched my waist and laughed, your wife none the wiser. I feel you on my neck, my many necks. You double occupy me, the cliffs of Dover at my back, the mighty empire fallen, and me a girl, my heady flicking tongue, overly sweet, my dependable anger your oyster. Once at a dive, I watched an old man run his hands over the belly of a beautiful woman, pregnant the 5th time, then admire her heels as she clicked away, no choice but to let him touch her. I'm really all right. I smell with my mouth, lilacs, bread, a grandpa's musty breath. I know, you're angry. You also took me to be yours. Do I have time for 2 more? 2 more short ones? Okay. I'm gonna read a love poem and in Taylor's spirit, in the spirit of October, there are witches. There are always witches, really. Stingray. While you soak the venom from your foot, I read you a book about witches. One pulverized a farmer's livestock. One ruined all the men. Another birthed a demon rabbit who ate the village children. What is true? The stingrayed foot, the book, you or me? True, I asked the moon for you. Then you appeared in your patched jacket, your grandpa's bolo inked down your forearm, the 2-pronged woven leather fanging down your wrist. What isn't true will make us suffer, unless the witches were burned or hanged or tarred and feathered, their bodies impersonating flight. You really did appear. You came with me into the ocean like a mist. I'm afraid of losing it. When I swim, the jellyfish waft below, clouds in reverse, and nothing ever touches me. The pectoral disc moved like the idea of a pectoral disc, tail whipping, tissue rising with mucus and venom until the stinger clung like a mean fingernail to your foot. At first, I didn't believe you. Then my father held your foot like a child's in his hand. And then I think I'm going to end with a poem from my last book, Refusal. So I once read a critic who said that without Hamlet, Ophelia has no story. And that like really pissed me off. And so I transcribed all of Ophelia's lines from the play. And what I think I see revealed there is a story of gaslighting. So this is kind of a response to that critic. I think he's probably dead. But this one's for Ophelia. Loving Ophelia is loving a ghost. And loving a ghost is loving yourself. And loving yourself is a sudden sorrow. And a sudden sorrow is the place where the river pools. And the place where the river pools is not suicide. And not suicide is confronting the unknown. And confronting the unknown is the active condition of womanhood. And the active condition of womanhood is the beauteous nature of Denmark. And the beauteous nature of Denmark is love sickness. And love sickness is obsession with a version of yourself. An obsession with a version of yourself is egomania. And egomania is a room of mirrors. And a room of mirrors is love and hate simultaneously. And love and hate simultaneously is the trick of abuse. And the trick of abuse is a vexation of the mind. And a vexation of the mind is the feeble dawn of gaslight and tea. And the feeble dawn of gaslight and tea is an overbearing husband. And an overbearing husband is a soliloquy of cliches. And a soliloquy of cliches is the misery of scholars. And the misery of scholars is an old friend's skull. And an old friend's skull is a sudden sorrow. And a sudden sorrow is holding one's breath. And holding one's breath is swimming away. And swimming away is the other shore on which Ophelia has woken. Thank you.
Well, we just witnessed 4 of the finest writers writing today, and I truly believe that. When it comes to contemporary writing, I'm just in awe, like Jenny said, of all 4 of you. Thank you for allowing me to publish your poems and to hopefully send them out into the world. And for you, Taylor, who helped me with BPR and now have your own life of poetry going on. You better send me some damn poems too. We've got time for questions. Please ask these smart people some questions.
I have a question for Ananda to kick it off, if that is all right with everybody. Ananda, you have such a, sorry, I wrote a whole bunch of stuff over here for questions as I was listening, so I'm just going to read it off. Ananda, you have such a beautiful control over concise language and using that condensed language with your line breaks. And I'm really curious as to what your revision process is in order to achieve this. I am, as Adam knows, just obsessed with line breaks and really good line breaks. And you seem to me a master of it. So I'm really, really interested in how you get this level of emotion in such small spaces.
Oh my gosh, ask me questions all day. What a lovely question. Thank you so much. That is really lovely. I think, in the past couple of months or weeks or months, I've been talking more about my poems versus just writing them. And I think I figured out that the thing that moves me, that gives me most energy while writing is line breaks. I think that's a thing that I really love. So thank you for noticing that. So I a lot of my lines, they come with the breaks. Not all of them, but I sort of get it all down, and I have a lot of breaks in the first drafts. And any poem I write, I sort of like very procedural. I get a document and I just paste it above so that I'm very free with what I'm doing because I have it right under it. And mostly what happens is first a lot of trimming, like you sort of first drafts are very, very long. And then I spend a lot of time playing with the line breaks. So I think a lot of the breaks in a poem come in the first drafts, but then I find I spend a lot of time choosing which ones will stay and which one detract from one another, So there's a lot of breaking and re-breaking in the revision process. But the first drafts have them because I think that gives me a lot of energy. So when I get in the first lines, when I'm seeing where the breaks are creating different meanings, that sort of helps me come up with the next line. So I use them, even if I change them later, I use a lot of the initial line breaks. Thank you.
Thank you. That was beautifully answered.
I have a question for Jenny. So congratulations on your upcoming publication, your book. I was wondering, what is the difference sort of for you, the shift between like Refusal and this upcoming publication? Different directions or in the same vein, or tell me about it.
It's so good to see you. Thank you for that question. I wrote a lot of the book in the pandemic. So first of all, like weird long-term isolation, which I think allowed me to do like longer projects. I think when I was writing Refusal, I was like first starting my teaching job and kind of like writing in these like snatches of time where I could, but I sat down with a lot of material and did a lot of research, which is like kind of my original love. I like writing the court transcript. It's like prose poems punctuated by these evidence poems, which are kind of driven by my research because I was studying Adelaide Crapsey, who invented the cinquain, which is like a 5-line little gem of a poem. And then also I was writing about, well, during the pandemic, I got completely obsessed with true crime podcasts and like BritBox and like all these like British crime shows. And I was thinking a lot about the time when I lived in Baton Rouge. There were 2 active serial killers when I went to college there. And so just kind of thinking about like the ways in which we become obsessed with psychopathic men, and how that is like a cultural focus when we don't ever really talk about the victims. And so just kind of reading a lot of like legal work and, you know, studying the ways in which the court fails. And so, yeah, just like, I think bigger projects were happening in this book. Yeah, and then also like the third section of the book is just a series of bitch poems. So I just went for it because I was in the pandemic and I was like, I'm a bitch.
Fantastic. I love that. Thank you.
Thanks.
I will keep asking questions. So if anybody is sick of listening to me, just tell me to be quiet. My question is also for Jenny. So I am in love with all of the poems that you read. My master's piece is about confronting my, the inability to confront my abuser when I played college soccer. But I was really curious about your emotional process of working through these pieces. And did you find both freedom and fear in writing about your experience? Because I'm finding it to be incredibly fearful and kind of terrifying and painful, but in a weird cathartic way. So I'm just really curious as to how you pushed through that in order to be able to produce this amazing work.
Oh, thank you. I'm so sorry that you dealt with that too. It's all too familiar to many of us. I think it's hard to relive your trauma through writing, and that can happen in many ways. I think we have to like protect ourselves from that. I think the pandemic made that more difficult. Just not having access to people like support systems. But I also found with refusal, especially, that not necessarily like the writing was like therapeutic, but also really difficult, like therapy can be, you know, bringing up a lot of old trauma. But what was really cathartic to me was sending the poems out. And so I spent actually a year sending them out and withdrawing every single submission, because I knew that like I was taking a huge risk, and I was right, actually. I ended up in court. And so I just sent them out again. And like once they were published though, like some of those poems were published, it was out of my hands. And there was like a huge freedom in that and relief in that. And I think once I read the poems out loud and other people responded with like, oh, I've been through this before, like you just did, you know, that was like the most meaningful connection. And I actually made friends through that, like invaluable friendships. So I think like in the end, despite the reliving the trauma and the trouble that happened later, it's, you know, good trouble and created like really positive changes.
That's amazing. Thank you. I wanted to tell you that I got all of that from your repetition and alliteration, and especially in the alteration in your repetition. That was probably my favorite part, was when you would go back, you would say the phrase and then you would go back and then you would add more to it. And it just demonstrates how easily truth can be buried in language and in representation. But I think that what you do pulls it back out and demonstrates that truth through that mechanism of burying. And I think it's absolutely wonderful.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. Thanks, Meredith.
Taylor, I think all of our heads kind of turned at the phrase "I done clicked my heels 3 times." So would you like to tell us about your upcoming publication? Because I'm super excited for it.
Yeah, so I Didn't Click My Heels 3 Times is inspired by The Wiz. I don't know how many of you guys are familiar with The Wiz. It's essentially like this cultural gemstone. It's sort of like a Black version of The Wizard of Oz, essentially. But interestingly enough, the poems in Bloodworm were once sort of sitting in a full-length collection that was actually a much earlier version of I Didn't Click My Heels 3 Times. And I realized that the poems in Blood Warm sort of needed their own space. And so I took those poems out, and then the full-length collection sort of started to materialize. And I guess Blood Warm is sort of thinking about what it's like sort of being a Black woman in America, which is essentially, you know, the question of constantly always being an outsider or not belonging. And I think I Didn't Click My Heels 3 times is sort of on the opposite end of the spectrum, thinking about what home means and how to define home, and how sort of our early childhood home or environments go on to ultimately define us as well later in life, as The Wiz and The Wizard of Oz are very much about home and what happens when we're sort of forced away from those comforts and those roots that we have made or have put into the ground. And so it's definitely inspired by the movie. There will probably be some Wiz references in the book as well, which I'm really excited to play with in the editing process. And also hopefully we get to do some fun stuff with design as well, with the cover and things of that nature. But yeah, that's what that project is about, and I'm very excited for it to come out to the world.
Great, thank you so much. I'm really excited to see it.
I had a question for Mary, or I guess really all of the poets, if all of you have something to say about it. So I write poetry, and I love to hear about other poets' processes, especially when it comes to how long it takes you to finish a poem from the moment you get wherever you get the idea from, whether it's overhearing it in a conversation or reading, you know, something like you get the idea, you conceptualize it, you start working on it, you revise it, you sit with it. How long does it take to get from that initial idea to finishing it?
Well,
Generally.
let me say that I have one poem that won some position in Terrain's contest 3 years ago that took 20 years to write. I wrote it 20 years before. I knew it was inadequate. I had to abandon it. And then I stumbled back onto it and suddenly had the imagery or the insight or whatever to turn it into a viable poem. On the other hand, the poems in Dear If almost all came as first drafts in April of 2018. And it was just because of the inspiration of the phrase Dear If and addressing God, who I don't exactly believe in anyway, as dear, because the idea of God is dear, even though the way God is taught is not dear. And so it's the word dear, that way of addressing a confusing and sometimes angry, negative, imaginary, or not being really pushed me. Thanks. Good question.
I think you said also if other of us wanted to talk about process also. For me, I'm very much a collector of tidbits of phrases, images. The notes app in my phone is probably very sick of me at this point, but I just will sort of collect things that come to me in passing while, you know, riding in the car, walking, things from dreams. And I sort of do this until things begin to talk to each other, or things begin sort of like reaching towards one another. By the time I put things onto a Word document, there's no telling how much time has passed from that original sort of impetus or idea. But once I do put things into a Word document, the poem itself sort of materializes pretty quickly, just because I'm also someone that has to like finish something once I start it, type of thing. But I've had to really learn how to let the poems come to me. And that has been something that has become, I think, more increasingly difficult in the pandemic as we're all stressed out and writing has become more difficult in some ways, maybe easier in some with time perhaps, but I think the pandemic has changed the way that we are writing, and having to accept that I necessarily can't do poem a day, or I can't wake up every morning and just write for 2 hours because the brain is just not working that way, or just having to accept that I'm not going to write maybe for 3 weeks. But whenever I do sit down and get to the page, I have to trust myself to create something that I feel good about and that I feel proud of. And that's sometimes scary, trusting yourself to do that when you get there after spending so much time not having done anything. But it has been something that I think the pandemic has been also really helpful in teaching me to just let the poems happen when they happen. So if you're struggling, the poems will come.
Thank you guys so much for answering my question.
Hey, Mary. I've been reading your poems for a long time, and I've seen your poems cross my desk, and I've published them for a long time. But just tonight, I've heard you read, I think, for the first time, and what a joy to hear you read. And all of those semantic and linguistic wranglings that come across so well when you're reading them. And then I just noticed when I was listening to that, and I was thinking, wow, this is the closest that I've ever heard to an authentic, the kind of authentic inquisitiveness that Marianne Moore has with language. And then I looked down at your, and for the first time I made that connection, Mary Moore and Marianne Moore. And I wondered if you ever were enamored with her poems and language and inquisitiveness and love of oddities and baseball and zoos and all that, like I was, or if you're more influenced by the Renaissance, your scholarly bend.
What a great question, and thank you, Adam. And I have always loved knowing that you were reading my poems. I'm influenced both by modernism, well, by 3 things: modernism, including Marianne Moore. And interestingly, I had Sandy McPherson as a teacher at UC Davis, although I got my PhD in literature rather than creative writing, which Davis didn't have anyway. And Sandy, I believe, is a daughter of Bishop and Marianne Moore. There is a genealogy there. And so I taught Marianne Moore for the first time when I came to teach at Marshall in graduate seminars. And I do just love her. And I love her quirkiness and it's clear to me that she engages a lot with sound, and like Taylor was saying, allowing the poem to lead you. And Taylor also is very big on sound. Everyone here is. And I think you are led by your ear a lot. And then you have to let it work on it to make sense, if that makes sense. But anyway, I've discovered influenced a lot by Dunn and Herbert. So I have really disparate influences. I love contemporary poets too, and I learn a lot about trying to stay more open and less closed. I have a tendency innately to want to close poems off at the end, like Renaissance poets often do. So I'm trying to learn to not do that as much. Thank you. What a nice question. Thank you.
One more question. Oh, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, sorry. I had a question for Jenny. Jenny, I really loved all of the poems you shared tonight. I especially loved the poem from the perspective of the judge, the Honorable Answer Speaks. And I was just wondering about the process for that poem, choosing to write from the perspective of the judge and using his own perspective to sort of critique his actions, because I thought that was a really creative and effective way to tell your story. So I was just wondering how you came to that decision.
Thank you, Kaylee. Yeah, so I was really inspired while I was writing by Ilya Kaminsky's Deaf Republic, and thinking of like creating a cast of characters, you know, to like, I think also like feeling misunderstood and feeling like something unfair is happening to me. I usually try to like, you know, consider and write in the perspective of the other people, I guess. And so I actually paid to have the like my actual court transcript. It's very expensive, by the way, but I was like, this will be research material. So I went through it, and like, so a lot of it, I mean, not a lot of it is verbatim. A lot of it is based on experience, but then, yeah, I just tried to sort of like cast myself in these different characters to try to like paint a picture of what, because I think I also felt like what's happening to me is so incredibly ridiculous, that it seemed like it needed to be like a play or a film. So I also have, I didn't read any of these tonight, but I also have the attorney on the other side only speaks in Bible verses. Just like, I just did like a Bible search of like the word whore. And it's just like great material because there's a lot in the Old Testament, just like condemnation, you know, and that's how I kind of saw that person. So I had fun with it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thanks everybody for coming out. So appreciate it. Thanks to the readers for being so gracious, and wow, what a great turnout. I hope to do this again in a couple of months, and I hope everybody will be back. Everyone have a wonderful night and a wonderful rest of the week. See you later.
Thanks, Adam.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, guys.
Bye.
Thanks to all of you. What a wonderful experience. Thank you. Readers and staff, thank you.